thank you very much for having me. Thank you to the Observatory for highlighting my story, which I guess is a fairly shocking example, but only one example amongst a great many, as the report highlights. So it's a longish story, but I'll keep it as brief as I can in summary. Story goes back to 2018 when the school where I was working as chaplain, a Christian school. My job as the chaplain was, amongst other things, to be the particular voice of Christian values in the school, as you might very well expect. And as an ordained person, that's fairly obviously what I would be doing. The school invited in a group called Educate and Celebrate, which aims to, on a surface, it says it's about anti-bullying in terms of LGBT issues, but it also aims to embed gender and gender identity into the whole life of the school, which is a little bit beyond simply anti-bullying. And they came and did some staff training. And as part of the staff training, they highlighted important things about, preventing bullying and making sure that different areas of life were seen in examples in classes and whatever, and none of the things that anyone would object to. But then it went a bit further. And at one point, the leader of the training had the staff chanting about the need to smash heteronormativity. And heteronormativity is the idea that there are male and female, and that's the basic defining set of humanity. That's the normal way of humans, and that the male-female pair bond is a normal part of the way that human societies are structured. And the idea of smashing this is to say that these distinctions should be completely destroyed, which goes quite a long way beyond saying don't bully people for who they are. And certainly, as far as I can see, Christian beliefs are broadly heteronormative, as well as biology and just the real world points us in that direction. So after this training, I went to the school leadership and I said, well, look, there are aspects of this that are absolutely fine, but there are some areas where Christians might be uneasy, might disagree. So can we have a conversation about what is and isn't put in place in the school? And they said, absolutely, yes, no problem, we'll do that. And then a few months later, I was told, oh no, we're doing the whole thing. And there had been no consultation, no discussion. I had simply been excluded. And then I said, hang on, what's going on here? They said, oh, we didn't include you in the discussions because we thought you might disagree, which was rather odd, I thought. A school chaplain trying to say, let's think about the Christian values of the school, is excluded deliberately from that conversation. So across the course of the year, I picked up from staff and pupils in the school a certain amount of unease about the sort of political agenda that was going on behind some of what was happening, until a pupil said to me in the summer term 2019, how come we're told we have to accept all this LGBT stuff in a Christian school? And I thought that was a really interesting way of putting the question. How come we're told we have to accept? And he said, can you talk about that in a sermon in chapel? And I thought, well, yeah, that's absolutely fair enough. And every summer term, I always try to take topics from pupils. So I gave that sermon, and the sermon is available to read online in various places. The easiest place to find it probably would be via christianconcern.com/Bernard, which gives links to the sermon and links through to various information about my case as well. So you can find it, you can read it for yourselves to judge what I said. But essentially what I said was, it's really important we respect people we disagree with. When there are ideological differences of belief, respect the people you disagree with, but loving your neighbour as yourself doesn't mean you have to agree with people. It means respect them. No excuse for personal attacks, no excuse for abuse. Nobody should be discriminated against. But where there are differences, make up your own mind. That was a really key part of what I was saying. And as examples, I said, you may believe that the Christian understanding of marriage of one man, one woman is correct. You may believe that biological sex is real and sometimes makes a difference, though often it doesn't. And you may look at the language around gender identity and think that it's incoherent, doesn't quite make sense, and therefore question what's going on with that. You may do all those things, but if you accept all the LGBT ideology, along with the basics of non-discrimination, if you accept the ideology, that's absolutely fine too. So I was saying, respect people, make up your own minds. And for doing this, the school leadership hauled me into a meeting and basically an interrogation. What on earth do you think you're doing? And I was suspended from my job and reported to the police under the British government's anti-terrorism strategy. So I was reported as a potential terrorist for saying you may believe ordinary Christian and philosophical beliefs and respect the people you disagree with. And that's a really important thing. And that was terrifying for me. I only found out because in the course of the disciplinary proceedings, I was given some papers which mentioned in passing that they'd done this. And then when I read that, I had visions of the police breaking down the door at 6 o'clock in the morning and dragging me away and seizing all the computers and phones in the house. And I had no idea what might happen. And it was only afterwards that the school said to me, oh yes, the report, the police said it didn't meet the threshold for terrorism, which is no great surprise. But the police officer had said it was inappropriate in society to be saying these things, which shows not only the intolerance of these ideas within the school leadership, even within what's supposed to be a Christian school, but intolerance amongst the police force. And what on earth are the police doing saying that a respectful presentation of Christian values is unacceptable in society? So I was disciplined and I was sacked for gross misconduct, for doing my job, for simply doing my job as far as I could see. They said that people had been offended, but they couldn't really point to anything that was actually offensive in what I said. As I say, you can read it and judge for yourselves if you want to. I appealed and I was reinstated by the governors because I think they recognised that the process followed hadn't been fair. But I had a lot of conditions placed upon me, which included censorship of all my sermons. They had to be pre-approved by a member of the senior leadership team, which made my life really difficult. And I wasn't really allowed to speak to pupils. And previously I'd been teaching as well, and they refused to let me teach. And the idea that a Christian person might be allowed to speak to the pupils freely and openly simply wasn't acceptable to them. That's the sort of depth of that extreme secularist intolerance that I was having to face. And then COVID hit and I was furloughed. So despite this time of real crisis of moral and spiritual, psychological concerns, they said, no, we don't need a chaplain at this time. We don't need his input. We'll furlough him. And then they used the excuse of the loss of revenue over COVID to get rid of me, to make me redundant. So I lost my job at the end of 2020. And then this became public because there was supposed to be an employment tribunal, a court case, because I was claiming religious discrimination against the school and unfair dismissal. The idea that a Christian chaplain should be suing a Christian school for religious discrimination against Christians, that shows you, I think, quite how far the extreme secularism can be taken by some people. That's where they want to end up, the absolute silencing of Christian beliefs that don't fit with their very, very strong ideology. Court case was supposed to be in June last year, but unfortunately the school's lawyers, June this year, the school's lawyers didn't manage to get the paperwork sorted out in time, despite having lots of warning. And the judge had to put the case back to September of next year. So I will have been a year and 3/4 from losing my job to even being able to get it to court. But of course, that doesn't account for the longer period where I was put under this intolerable pressure. And has been said to me by various people that the process is the punishment. The fact that I've been put through this, I haven't been able to get work in ministry. There's no prospect probably they'll ever work in school again because of what they've done. They don't want Christian voices, and even moderate Christian voices such as my own. You know, I fully recognize that there are different points of view and people are entitled to hold them. But amongst those points of view is the Christian point of view, the traditional Christian understanding of who we are as human beings. And that should be allowed too. So I think my story points to sort of, as it were, the slippery slope. If we don't protect freedoms, all freedoms, but particularly religious freedom, the freedom to speak and to share one's faith and to discuss it openly, if we don't protect that, then the increasing intolerance, the increasing discrimination, what I suffered, a chaplain in a school chapel in an act of worship saying these Christian ideas are okay, that will be deemed so unacceptable that people will lose their jobs and their livelihoods and the mental and physical health implications that you suffer when you go through that sort of process. So, you know, don't let this sort of intolerance continue, because in 5-10 years time, what I experienced, extreme now, potentially could become quite normal and standard. And that's why the work of the Observatory, the work of Christian Concern, who are the organisation supporting me in Britain, and also the Free Speech Union, of which I'm a member in Britain, that stands up for the freedom of all people, religious and non-religious. And there are organisations, but they need every bit of help they can get if we want real freedoms to continue in our society. So that's my story in brief. And I dare say if there are questions later, I might come back to more details, but I hope that gives you a sense of exactly what we're facing.